and then I woke up again, and then I woke up again, and I just kept waking up, kind of time after time, and each time I woke up a little bit further into the same day. I think it was like a door was unlocked, something was unlocked in my consciousness that allowed me to walk through into some other level of reality. Realize that reality is not as we've been told it is. And I suppose my story is really a direct illustration of that.
I think a piece of advice I would give to anybody is to listen to this woman. It's as simple as that. How
You've
are
been
you,
listening.
Freya?
You've been listening to me for a long time, is he?
I have listened to you, and all the better for it, I can tell you.
How many years is it now?
I reckon it's getting on for a decade.
Oh, it is. Yeah, yeah,
Oh, and some probably, and some, yeah.
yeah. It was at the beginning of the peace intention when we
It
met each
was.
other.
It was. I'm rubbish at remembering years. Unless something monumental happened, I can't remember one year from the next.
Yeah,
So, you have had a very interesting life, a very interesting story that is playing out. And I think it's incredibly worth listening to.
yeah. Well, I've been trying to tell the story for I mean, it's been going on for 25 plus years now, and I've been trying to tell it. It's not for want of trying to tell it, put it that way, that it's not been told. But certainly there have been, it seems as though there have been many things have got in the way of telling it. And it's taken a long time for things to catch up with the story. Do you know what I mean? It's like
Mm.
it was so far out there when it first started happening, and it is still far out there for many people. But I think anybody who has experienced any kind of awakening in the last, certainly in the last few years, or in their life at all, is beginning to realize that, you know, reality is not as we've been told it is. And I suppose my story is really a direct illustration of that I've been
So,
living in that for a long time.
yeah. So, describe life directly before any form of awakening. Where were you? What was the score? Normal Freya, if I can be so rude as to use
Oh,
that
okay.
phrase.
Um, it's
Previous Freya, that's
it's
better.
almost impossible to find
Mm,
that memory now. I mean, I can go looking for it, but it is so vague, and only really the key moments stand out as
mm,
memories. Um, I mean, in terms of my early life, I mean, I came from a very normal family, a very violent family, I suppose. My father was very destructive, and my parents got divorced when I was 10. Um, and then I went off to. There was nothing strange happened in my early life that I really remember. Um, uh, well, yeah, nothing specific that seems to relate to this story.
mm.
When I was 18, I went off to university to study psychology, and I went to Swansea University, and I was in my second year, I think. So I'd have been 19 when the first kind of key event happened. And again, in recalling this story, I'm going to try and recall it as it happened rather than with hindsight. As it happened, uh, I went to bed one night, and in the morning I woke up, and then I woke up again, and then I woke up again, and then I woke up again, and I just kept waking up, uh, kind of time after time, and each time I woke up a little bit further into the same day. So it wasn't like a dream, where you're in some sort of fictional experience. It was the day that I was eventually going to live out fully. Um, I didn't eventually wake up and start a different day. There was no delineation between the dreaming and the waking. So eventually the waking up stopped and I just carried on with the day. And it basically destroyed my understanding of, or my perception of, what is for certain a dream and what is for certain my real life or my waking life. Yeah.
Hi, Huggy Higgins. That's my dog.
Higgins.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it it unhinged something that was fixed. Something had been fixed up until that point, like everybody else. It was really, really clear. You're dreaming now. You're awake now. There
Mm.
was such a distinct. There's usually some form of awareness that one is one experience and something else is the other. And suddenly that was just merged because the dream bled into the day. And
And
although
what were your thoughts around that? Was it just like, oh, that's a bit weird, or was it like something strange is happening here? I mean, to what degree did you take notice of it?
um, I know that I didn't talk to anybody about it. I know that
Hmm.
it wasn't abnormal enough to think, oh my God, am I losing my mind? What on
Mm.
earth is happening? But I also know that it took some time to settle down. It bothered me. It bothered me for a while. Um, but I think that with all of these things, because there's no context of otherness, there's just, at that time for me, and I think for most people, there's just normal life. And normal life consists of certain ingredients. Sleep is one of them. Dreaming is one of them. Eating is one of them. Nighttime is one of them. Daytime is one of them. There's not that many ingredients. You're not looking for something to mean something else. I wasn't looking for that experience to be having any other meaning other than what it was. It was odd. It was very, very odd, and it was very
Mm.
disconcerting. But then it was over. It didn't happen again. But I know now that I think it was like a door was unlocked. Something was unlocked in my consciousness that allowed me to walk through into some other level of reality. And again, I think it's important for me to be clear that I'm not telling this story in order for people to say, oh, it's an interesting story or it's a strange story. I'm telling it now because my belief is that we are at a point in time in the evolution of consciousness where reality is going to become even more extraordinary and strange and bizarre than it has been in the last few years. And the more prepared we are for that, the more that we accept that that's a possibility. And I think that my story, if anything, it opens up for that to be a possibility for everybody. Because if one person's experienced it, anybody can experience it. It's like when Roger Bannister ran the 4-minute mile.
Yeah.
Up until that point, nobody could conceive of
Yeah.
a man running a mile faster than 4 minutes, and then suddenly he broke that spell by doing it, and suddenly within a very short period of time everybody was doing it, or
Yeah.
lots of
It's
people were doing it.
believing in the possibility.
Yeah, it's like there's a kind
Mm.
of invisible boundary of reality, a border of reality that we all live within, our own realm of
Mm.
possibility. And actually, when I first started writing about this story or this experience, that was how I kind of spoke about it, that we're all born into a pool of possibility. and that will depend on where we're born, when we're born, our gender, our culture, what we're taught at school. All of these things create a kind of pool of possibility that we live within. And what we don't realize is that actually that pool is within a larger and a larger and a larger body of water, and ultimately this kind of infinite sea that we're all in, but we can't perceive of it because it's too much information for us to deal with. And so we kind of maintain our normality and our existence by only looking within that pool of possibility that we're in. And sometimes it expands if people are willing and allow it to expand, but sometimes people will pull back, because it feels safer and more comfortable within the original pool. They don't really want it to expand. But I think right now we have no choice but to allow it to expand, because it's being expanded for us, because consciousness is expanding again. We've been in this great cycle of period of time of contraction of consciousness, and now it's, for some people, it's beginning to expand again. And as it expands again, our perception of reality will be following it, and thereby fundamentally different to anything we've experienced before.
Okay, so during these conversations we're going to be having, we'll be exploring all of that, because I'm sure for some that will be confusing. For me, it's confusing to a degree, and I openly admit it. And I've known you this long. It is when you haven't had these experiences that you've had yourself personally, it can be hard to get a grip of what is reality, or your perception of reality is not really. There's so much more than what you first imagine. However, let's continue with our chronological journey. So what happened next after you had this initial strangeness?
So I had this kind of Groundhog Day dream day. I mean, delineation was blurred. Nothing else happened particularly at university. Couple of years went by, and I worked in London for a little bit, and then I moved to work for a charity marketing and advertising agency in Cheltenham in Gloucestershire. And so the second thing that happened was I would say around that time, because I'd been studying psychology. I studied psychology, philosophy, and politics, and they all kind of blurred into one at some point. But I was very much a logical person. I wanted to understand how human beings worked on many levels, and but one thing that was very certain to me was that I was agnostic stroke atheist, I would say. The only form of spirituality that I understood or knew of back then was religion. I was very anti-religion. The only religion that was really within my realm of understanding was Catholicism, and my understanding of that was very vague and very negative. My mother had a bad experience of trying to divorce my father, who was very violent and was really threatening her life, and yet she was visited by people from the church who tried to encourage her to go back into her marriage. And I was very resentful at the time of that, and really very scared by the church, and very, very certain that I was going to have nothing to do with religion ever. And then one day I went to bed, and when I woke up in the morning, I was just in this state of what I would describe, and I described it then as complete unconditional love. I was just swimming in this incredible state of love. And it had obviously had no object. It It wasn't based on any relationship or person, and it was instantaneous. And I it was completely consuming and overwhelming, in the same way that when you fall in love with a person, you become very, very distracted. They become kind of the object of your attention, and this love became the object of my attention. It was almost as if I couldn't really think about or do anything else. It was I was just paying attention to it, and kind of overwhelmed by it. And again, because I was swimming in such a small pool of possibility. I didn't really have, we didn't back then. This would have been around 1995, 96.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have the word consciousness in our vocabulary. We didn't have spirituality. We didn't have awakening, spiritual awakening. None of those things were in my little pool of possibility. And I started to get really worried. I was thinking, what if this is a religious calling? What if this is what people mean? This is what happens to them, and they suddenly, run off and join a convent, or, because I couldn't imagine that it could be anything else. That's how I put the pieces of the puzzle together. Something is calling me, and the only thing that I can imagine is calling me is religion or God, and I don't believe in God. And the only association I have with God is the church, and I don't want anything to do with the church. I was actually scared of the church. At one point my mum had tried to get me to go to her convent school that she'd gone to as a child, and I just cried for a couple of weeks, and I was convinced that if she sent me there, they would kill me. And I actually said that. I said, I can't go there, they'll kill me.
Mm.
And
Wow.
so and I had to get off a bus. If ever nuns got on, I had to get off the bus. I mean, I was very anti
Yes.
Catholicism. And so it was like all roads were leading somewhere I couldn't go. I was if I'd been, born in a different time and different place, different experiences, maybe I would have just gone off and become a nun. I mean, the other funny thing was that although I was terrified of nuns, I was also fairly convinced I was going to become one. So there was, the fear was, fairly multifaceted. It was what I didn't want to do, and yet I had already had a sense that it could happen to me. And then suddenly there's this all-encompassing love and nowhere to put it. And the only road it's taking me down is into church and into religion.
And then you feel like you'd have been sort of taken over, I suppose, in a way.
Yeah, I suppose I couldn't allow for the possibility that there could be something that could have a stronger
Yeah.
control over my life than I did.
Yeah, I can imagine.
That what I wanted was what I wanted, and nobody and nothing was gonna, overpower that and lead me in a direction that I definitely didn't want to go in.
And what did you want at that time?
Well, I was just starting my own life. I just bought my own flat. I had a lovely, I just converted this lovely little flat in Cheltenham, and I had my independence, and I liked my job. I loved what I was doing. I had friends. I didn't want anything really. I didn't
Just
need
normal life.
just normal life. Yeah. And
Mm.
and at that time I had completely forgotten about the Groundhog Day. That was in my mind in no way associated with what was happening. But I now know it probably, well, certainly is connected. But I used to wander around outside churches thinking, I've got to go in. I've got to go in. But I really don't want to go in. And I tried to speak to people. I spoke to the only person I knew who was a friend who was a born again Christian, and I'd never spoken to her about her religion or her background or how she'd come to choose that path, or whether it happened to her like it happened to me. I thought maybe that's what this is, that born again Christians are people that have this kind of experience, and that they're and that's what was happening to me. And I think if she had said yes, then maybe I would have been more comfortable with the experience, and I would have, I don't know, I might have taken it more seriously. But all I did really was, after it lasted about 3 months, and it was actually exhausting. And after 3 months of really getting no answers from anybody about what it could be, or because she didn't understand it at all. When I spoke to her and I said what was happening to me, she said she'd never experienced anything like that. It was more I don't know, more cerebral choice for her to go into Christianity. And so I thought, well, I must be losing my mind. I literally must be having some sort of breakdown, or this is wrong. Something's gone wrong. And I can't stay like this because I can't function. I can't, I'm losing my focus on my work and my life. And I just don't know what to do with it. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to carry it. And although that may sound mad, that you're having this extraordinarily beautiful experience, but context is everything. Context is everything. And that's what I mean. To really have that experience, I would have been having to live in a completely different, or a much more expanded pool. Because what was happening was something from outside of my pool was seeping into my realm, into my experience. And I just could not understand it. So it actually started to make me fearful. And so I started to push back. I started to push back against it. And I pushed back against it really by drinking. I just drank an enormous amount. I went out pretty much every night. And so if I wasn't kind of drinking, I was hungover. And that seemed to kind of certainly distract me. And then one day it just stopped. And as it stopped, it kind of flipped 180 degrees into the deepest, darkest depression I've ever experienced in my life. It was the antithesis of where I'd been. And it was so overpowering that many days I would just lie on the floor and I couldn't get up. I just couldn't, I couldn't move. And I do realize now that whatever it is, it is trying to get through to all of us. And that if you resist it, it does create enormous suffering. But again, it's like, how do you not resist it when you don't know what it is and you don't know what's happening to you? And particularly if you're outside of any normal religious construct. And I suppose, again, that's why I'm trying to tell this story, because it's, I'm still not, I have no interest in any religious organization still. I'm not religious. I'm still not religious, regardless of what's happened to me, because I see religion as, quasi-political organizations, really, at this point in time. That's not to say that they haven't been more than that in the past, but at this point in time, that's not what interests me at all. So what I'm trying to do in sharing this story is create a bigger realm of possibility for people. So when, not if, but when these experiences start happening in their reality, they will have some reference, some point of reference to say, oh yeah, that woman was talking about something like this, or maybe it's okay. Maybe it's just part of what's happening, rather than doing what I did and getting, really freaked out by it and then resistant to it, and really standing in the way of an unbelievably powerful source of love, which is really what it was or is.
Okay, so you're in this state of depression. How did that play out?
Well, everything started to fall apart, really. My partner left me. I couldn't communicate. I could barely speak. I was kind of mute. I was still able to work. But yeah, what happened next? Something strange did happen with I seem to become more sensitive and again in ways that I wasn't really conscious of, but the story shows that I was. So there was one night when the night that my mum died, and suddenly, and she was only 55 at the time.
Oh gosh.
And I was living in Cheltenham, and I'd been to the pub, and I'd been with friends, and somebody who didn't live locally had said, a friend of mine had asked if she could stay the night at my house. And because I wasn't feeling great, I'd actually gone home early, and I said, yeah, sure, when you come, I'll stay awake and just knock on the door, and I'll let you in. So later that night, I was in bed, and there's a knock on the door, maybe 11:30, something like that. And I just froze solid. I couldn't move. And although logically my mind was saying, well, it must be her, you've got to go down and let her in. But my body was saying, no, just don't move, don't go.
Oh my gosh.
And I didn't. I couldn't go downstairs. I literally couldn't get out of bed to answer the door. And in the morning, I discovered that it wasn't her. She'd actually gone home with another friend, but it was actually the police who'd come to tell me that my mum had suffered a hemorrhage and was basically dying, and she did actually die before I got to see her, but somehow I knew so again, that's the first indication I had that something in me had changed. It wasn't just the experiences, it wasn't just that strange things were happening to me, but those strange things were changing me, that I was becoming a different person, that I could perceive. It wasn't just that I was lying in bed and there was a knock at the door late and I was a bit nervous about answering it. I had 100% reason to believe that was a friend of mine needing to come in, that I had offered a bed to. But some other level of me knew that it wasn't that. It was something I just didn't want to know about. I didn't want, I couldn't, didn't want to face. And so again, this is the beginning of becoming aware and conscious in a more expanded way. That my consciousness, what I was aware of, was beginning to expand in ways which aren't normal, which certainly hadn't happened to me before. And I do think that it was these strange experiences, and particularly that encounter with what I now call the divine light. I think that's what that love was, that those encounters were beginning to change me. And I just didn't know how much they were going to change me, and how many of them there were going to be, how many experiences there were going to be.
For sure. Well, we've probably got about 5 minutes left, Freya. Any other events subsequently that just bring this section to a close?
I'm trying to think where we are now. What happened next? Yeah, well, the next thing that happened was another key moment, I think. At that point I had somehow fairly miraculously, bearing in mind how depressed I'd been, I'd managed to get to the point where the owner of the company that I was working for had basically given me the advertising agency to run. I was very young, but I really loved what I was doing. Yeah, he went off to set up a consultancy and he gave me the agency. So I kind of had everything that I might have hoped to have. I had, I had a lot of money. I had my own home. I had autonomy. I had creative control over the agency. We moved to a lovely new building. I employed a whole new staff. All the things that you kind of think, if I get a bit more of this or get a bit more of that, then I'll be happy. I suddenly
dream
had
life, we would say.
Yeah, it was a dream life. Yeah. And and then one day I was in London and I was early for a client meeting and it was pouring with rain. And I just saw a door that looked like a museum or something. And I just thought, I'll just go and, take shelter from the rain in there. And it was a gallery, an art gallery. And I walked in and it was an exhibition of sculpture, abstract sculpture by a sculptor called Constantine Brancusi. And Brancusi was the first person to really begin. He's actually called the father of abstract art because he somehow began to create something beyond, just recording what we see. He was trying to find the essence of things, the source within things. I'd never heard of him before. I had no interest in sculpture whatsoever. And I walked into this room. It was a very small exhibition. And as I looked around, I just started to cry. And I just couldn't stop crying. And I remember being kind of stuck in the corner of this gallery thinking, how am I going to get out of here? I can't stop crying. And I was looking around. There's nothing in that room that reminded me of anything, or nothing that could or should have been able to trigger any emotion in me. And I walked out and I knew that something really, really profound had happened to me. And because I felt this, it was like, I wasn't crying because I was sad. It was like this something that had been stuck inside of me was suddenly coming out. It was like something was just unlocked by it. And that it was more relief. It was like a relief, like what a relief. I finally found the key to that thing, to that greater thing. And again, even then, I didn't even have a concept of that being healing, because healing for me was, you scratch your finger or something and it bleeds and it heals over. That was healing. I didn't understand that healing could be something much, much more profound and holistic than that. And I really cried for a long time. It was days, and I made up my mind that I had to give up my job, and I had to try and find out what that man knew, because it occurred to me that there was nothing. I didn't know why, but it occurred to me that there was nothing more important than understanding what it was that had happened in that room, in that gallery. And that if I could actually uncover that and do that for myself, find that out for myself. If I could share that with one other person, if I could give one other person that key that he had given me, that my entire life would be worth living.
That's pretty profound, isn't it?
It really was. It was,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
I went and resigned, and I didn't resign and say, "Oh, I'm I'm going to become a sculptor," which is what I did do. I resigned and said I was going to do a master's degree in environmental business or something, something like that. I gave some relatively credible excuse as to
Mm,
how to get out of that position. But again, it was a radical move. I gave up everything. I gave up I was writing my own paychecks. I had everything to lose, and yet this thing, and again, I didn't even have an interest in sculpture.
mm,
It was not something. I'd never been led to sculpture. I'd never looked at sculpture. And it's interesting now, what I know about Brancusi now is that he studied Zen Buddhism for a very, very long time. He was a very spiritual man, and he was led to the essence, that which lies within things, the surface of things. He was on the same journey that I was going on, and I didn't realize
just
that then. I
knew
thought
that I
it was
had
about the
to stop
sculpture.
what I was
It
doing
took a while
and
to
pay
realize it wasn't
attention to
about
what
the
it was
sculpture.
that
The
happened.
sculpture was
I
just,
really didn't think about it that much.
it was so profound and as an experience.
Mm,
I just knew I had to follow that light and see where it led. And even though I had a lot to lose, um, in terms of giving up my job and
mm,
everything, and paying the mortgage and all of that,
yeah,
I just decided that I had to become a sculptor, because that was all that was open to me. I thought it was about the sculpture, and in some ways it was about the
yeah,
sculpture, but it was more about, in many ways, about the man and the journey he had been on, that had allowed Brancusi to actually discover something which was below the surface of mundane reality, everyday reality, which up until that point, until he started doing that, everybody thought that's all there was. He, in a way, did open a door to a deeper level of reality, because he said, here is something you haven't seen before, but it's there within a cockerel. There is this form, there is this essence within a fish, there is this essence, and that's what he was trying to capture. And nobody had done that before. Nobody in the West had done that before, and that was the beginning of what we call abstract art, of
yes.
looking into find something below the surface.
So you've gone from being, as you say yourself, a logical, career-driven or career-led person, having a very normal, fairly boozy life,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
having these experiences and knowing that it meant something monumental to you, to the extent that you were prepared or compelled, shall we say, to leave everything you knew about your normal material life
yeah,
behind.
yeah. And looking back on that now, that sounds more extraordinary than it seemed at the time, which makes me believe even more strongly that something, some people would say, Buddhists might call it the true self, or the true essence, or the higher self, or whatever, that
Yeah.
something other than the mundane version of me had
Yes.
started to make decisions for me, had started to take the lead, and was making decisions which other people might have considered illogical or irrational or, uh,
Yeah.
bizarre, really. But to me, just seemed like, well, this is what I know I've got to do. I just know it.
Yeah.
It was
Moving into
gnosis.
a new normality, really, for you. It's
Yeah,
You had no option. I mean, the life you had before, it sounds from what you're describing that it was no longer tenable. You just couldn't be in that place anymore.
I funnily enough, I had this feeling that I used to talk about quite a lot, whereas I felt like I wanted my life to be like a stained glass window. I had this vision, despite my lack of interest in religion. I had this vision of my life being like a stained glass window with all these different colors of lights coming in, and that however it may seem as if my life was very rich and very, that I had what most people would desire to have. And
Mm,
particularly at that young age, I was only 25, twenty
mm,
six at this time. Um, it felt like a grey, dirty window to me. It felt like something wasn't right, that something really needed to change, and I was not going to find it where I was. And there was nothing in the mundane world that attracted me, that was gonna help me find it. And like I say, something else was making the decisions. I know that now.
okay.
Mm.
Well, over the next conversations, of which there will be many, we will
Yeah,
start looking. We will start looking at the different colours in that stained glass window and explore them. And I think um, the longer people listen to you, the more extraordinary they will find this journey. We have only scratched the surface,
we have.
hardly even that. Freya,
We
thank you so much, and
Yeah.
I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Izzy. Look forward to
Bye.
it. Bye.